its roots in the experience of 9/11. Those thoughts, those feelings, those concerns have never left me. In fact, in some ways, they've grown more intense. I want to begin with a little bit of a story. How many of you read Marjorie Kinnan Rawlings' The Yearling? One of my favorite books. Powerful story of a young boy named Jody, his family barely scratching a living from the ground in the backwoods of Florida. One day he finds a young fawn. He's a lonely boy. He has no pets, no siblings. He's alone. But he finds this fawn. He adopts it. He calls the fawn Flag. Flag becomes his closest friend, his constant companion. He loves that fawn more than life itself. How many of you have had a pet that you felt like that about? Well, that's the context of the story, and I want to say that the early parts of the book, in it basically, Jody is living in a stage of life that we might call innocence. I once had that sense about my country, about the United States of America. Tears will hover near the surface of my eyes when we sing America the Beautiful. And I can remember to this day sitting in the graduate class at Arizona State University of Professor Joe, J.O., from Korea, when he spoke the phrase American imperialism, and it jolted me. I could not imagine anyone saying that or accusing our country of anything approaching that kind of behavior. But let me say now, and for all of us in this new millennium, we are seasoned in the sport of life. We're not rookies anymore. We know about George Washington and the cherry tree. We know that innocence cannot stand in the face of reality, whether it's the innocence of our country being a nation state or the innocence of our behavior in the larger world and our need to protect ourselves, for the need for national security. So I come to you this morning with a lot on my heart and with a lot to say, but I won't be too extensive. And as always, mine's not the final word. I have no imprimatur of infallibility. By the way, imprimatur is like the signal, the sign, the seal you have to get from the Vatican if you want to publish something in the name of Catholicism. It's the good housekeeping seal of approval on steroids. So I have no imprimatur with truth. I have an opinion. And my opinion is that the world today is a horrible place. And the question I have for all of you, and I know you would have preferred summer cotton candy. It isn't that kind of a sermon. How did the world end up in the condition it is today? Before sensing a call from God to the life of ordained ministry, my training was in this field of political science and public policy administration. The dominant school of thought for the relationship between nations for many, many centuries and now has been known as realpolitik. The operative assumption behind this theory is that there are evil actors in the world, bad people. So nations must possess and sometimes use such force as to keep these bad actors in their place, keep them from doing mischief. We call it national security. It came from a guy named Hobbes. The ideal of human harmony and world peace, in this view, must always be measured by political reality. Now, I'm not going to bore you further with the theory. I want to point out, though, that an additional assumption is the assumption, frequently unrecognized, that all people are rational. You see, realpolitik has no compelling answer for the suicide bomber who's willing to sacrifice himself or herself, or even the entire population of their homeland. The people reflecting back, who masterminded the tragic events of September 11th, were, in my opinion, on the edge of insanity. And they were, and if they haven't been, ought to be held accountable for justice. But even if we assume we could capture everyone ever involved in a terrorist act, publicly execute them in the worst possible manner, there would remain places in this world, and I want you to hear this, there would remain places in this world that is where life is so grim that they remain eternally fertile wombs of terrorism. And given the new technology of destruction available in our world today, this is the reality which confronts us. The only means by which realpolitik, force of arms, can guarantee our personal and national security is by turning the entire world into an American-run gulag. And that debate is going on right now across this country. Please note that as a nation, we incarcerate our people at a higher rate than any other democratic nation in the world. And yet, our streets remain unsafe. I believe, and I said this 2001, I'll say it again, in this new millennium, we must have a Marshall Plan for all the places in this world and in this nation where people live in misery. The ultimate answer to the desperation that gives rise to terrorism is a decent life. Every time we drop an unmanned drone on somebody and miss the mark and kill their children, we create another terrorist. As long as children go hungry and die in their parents' arms due to malnutrition, terrorists will be like dragon's teeth. We pull one and several will replace it. So what is the responsibility in this world between the church and the state and the individual Christian, you and me, towards the state? Jeff read to you from Romans 13, where it says, government is instituted by God. You're to maintain the law, you're to behave yourself and be a good citizen, and the law will work in your favor. We are in effect commanded by God to be good citizens, and we are. Whether it's George Bush or Barack Obama, I brace when people respond to our presidents by their last name without saying President Bush, President Obama, President Reagan, because it speaks of disrespect for the office. We're to be good citizens whether we agree with our leaders or not, and we're to pray for them. We are to keep the laws of the land. We are to pay for our taxes. We are to pray for our leaders, but it's not an unlimited obligation. It's conditioned by Christian conscience. In Acts 5, Peter and John heal this man at a time and place where the religious authorities were bothered by it. And they said to them, you need to stop that, and they had them lashed. But the response was, we must obey God rather than you. Individual Christians are to be good citizens, obeying their leaders in all things that do not conflict with Christian conscience. This is recognized in our law. That's why we have conscious objector status in relation to military conscription. We are citizens of God's realm first, and of this earthly realm second. God first, above country, above family, above self. So you may ask me, are we then not free to be patriots? On the contrary, we are especially free to be patriots. We are compelled to be patriots because we live in a democracy and our government is us. but it must be a Christian patriotism. What is patriotism? It is at its best a love of and support of one's country and its people. When we say, my country right or wrong, we're wrong. Because this makes of America an absolute, a God to be worshiped. All nations must be measured by God. And the patriotic church is one that clearly understands the need for separation of church and state. When the state acts in good and just ways, the church is a cheerleader. When the state acts in ways that are contrary to God's law, the church must rise up in humble indignation and say to her leaders, this is wrong. Throughout human history, and this is true of every religious tradition, not just our own, whenever the church and state have become one, blood has been shed and the innocent have suffered. Think about it. Spain during the time of the Inquisition, the Salem witch trials, which were what? Our own ancestors. The Taliban in modern Afghanistan. When the government with which the church interacts is a democracy, it becomes doubly critical that the church speaks to issues of justice and peace. Matthew 5 says, you're the light of the world, a city set on a hill that cannot be hidden. Nor do men and women light a lamp and put it under a bushel, but they put it on a stand, and it gives light to all who are in the house. Let your light so shine before humanity that all may see your good works and give glory to your Father who is in heaven. I am concerned. I am concerned that the mainline church, the moderates, have hidden their light under a cover. On a given day, correct me if I'm wrong, on any given day, you can turn the selector on your car radio and hear Christians speaking to the issues of the day. Is that true? But how many times will those speaking to the issues from the Christian perspective be from the mainline church? We have held ourselves above the fray, and in the process we have left the marketplace of ideas to others. We believed that the fall of the old Soviet Union, in that time, that the world had become a relatively safe place. Even if it was true then, I don't think it was. It's not now. Humanity, if it's to survive until the next millennium, cannot afford to allow any people or any nation to become so desperate that death is easier than life. You know, folks, this isn't in my notes, but when people put their kids on a train in Guatemala and send them through the triathlon of oppression and victimization and woundedness and death, sending them to the United States, they're not doing that because they want to make money. They're doing it because life at home is so dang desperate that they gamble their children's lives on the possibility of an infinitesimally better life. It can't be like that. As a people, we've been ill-informed. We have paid little attention to the world outside our getaway places like Cancun. We have allowed ourselves the luxury of insulation and, in a sense, isolation. But it's a false security, for the modern world, as 9/11 taught us, is really quite small. We've held ourselves above the fray, and in the process, we've left the marketplace of ideas to others. I believe we need to be heard. I believe the message that all are one is the message for the next millennium. I believe you need to be heard. So where do we go from here? Ours was a generation weaned on Korea, Vietnam, Kent State, Watergate. We asked a lot of good questions, and we demanded answers. We had high ideals. It was an age of innocence for a while. We were going to make the world a better place, right? Our elders spoke of duty, but we were more than a little cynical about government and business and religion. And the years have passed, and most of us who intended to do good mostly did well. And in spite of the critique we proffered of the preceding generation,